All right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for tuning in for this one. Nick, who is our guest?
Our guest was Dr. Debra Lieberman. She is an associate professor of psychology at the University of Miami, and she obtained her PhD from UC Santa Barbara. Brendan, what are some topics that we covered, and what's a little bit more about the work that she does?
Yeah, so she does work on sexuality, disgust, morality from that evolutionary psychology perspective. And it was such a fascinating conversation. I really think her perspective lends itself really well to getting a deeper understanding about how humans are interacting in the world today. So I really enjoyed her talking about some of that disgust piece, because I think that's a really common reaction, but getting a better understanding about how it's functional for humans to have a disgust reaction, I thought was a really interesting concept.
Yeah, and then we lightened things off with a little bit of gratitude, and that was great.
I was very gracious that we did that.
Yes, it was beautiful. So we've been pretty deep into evolutionary psychology over the past couple episodes. We've hoped that you've enjoyed and learned a bit from these episodes. We know that we have. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. Sit back, relax,
and enjoy the show.
Thanks, Dr. Lieberman, for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and we're looking forward to today. If you wouldn't mind just starting by explaining a little bit about your background and how you got into this work.
So thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm an evolutionary psychologist, and for those who don't know exactly what that is, I am a psychologist, and my goals are to understand the software that comprises the brain, so the mental apps. And I do that by reverse engineering and thinking about why the circuitry is there, what it evolved to do, by considering a variety of factors, most notably the human ancestral environment, thinking about the selection pressures that existed that led to the evolution of our brain. And I got my start in this field, my goodness, my sophomore year in undergrad at Binghamton, up in upstate New York. And I ended up taking a class in the bio department from David Sloan Wilson, who's also a well-known evolutionist. And he taught a course, Evolution in Human Behavior. And it was a senior grad course. And I was only a sophomore, but I went to him and I was like, I want in. And he's like, all right, well, do the best that you can. Needless to say, there were a lot of grad students and seniors like squabbling over ideas during the whole course. And I basically stayed silent throughout the whole thing. But it was a fantastic course. And so that, along with a very influential, I was taking this evolution course at Binghamton. At the same time, I happened to have been taking Philosophy 101, because I thought, I was a biochemistry major. I was on the way to med school, and I was like, you got to have a philosophy course. But I ended up hitting it such that the philosophy course I took was being taught by someone who was teaching me about Darwin. And so I had it like from both sides, and it was just like the stars aligned. And one of the conferences, the Human Behavior and Evolution Society conference, was happening at Binghamton that summer. So
it was the perfect storm for you.
It was an insanely perfect storm. It's eerie, actually, if I think about it and go back. But during David Sloan Wilson's course, we read a book called The Adapted Mind, which is, the Bible of evolutionary psychology. It really it brings together evolutionary biology and cognitive science in order to understand human nature and the generation of culture. People oftentimes don't remember that there's a subtitle to that book. And so it transformed my life, because it basically said, in all of the physical sciences, the laws of physics don't violate the laws of chemistry, and the laws of chemistry don't violate the laws of biology, and vice versa. But as soon as you get to all the social sciences, they're islands unto themselves. And I was like, and as a biochemistry major, I was like, well, that seems really weird, because we're just another species. And, you can talk about evolution and how it applies to humans as well. I was like, I didn't really know that was true until I started to go walk around my campus and knock on doors and talk to people. And I got summarily dismissed as, I was called my gosh, I was called an anti-feminist Nazi, which is really weird because I'm a Jewish woman. And so, but it was just very strange. Biologists couldn't understand why we were talking about humans, and anthropologists couldn't understand why we were talking about evolution. And it didn't make sense. So I decided to go and study with the authors of The Adapted Mind, John Tooby and Lita Cosmides, out in your neck of the woods, out in California at Santa Barbara. And the rest is history. I got my first job in Hawaii on a rock far, far away. It sounds luxurious. And I'm very happy to have jumped off the rock and gotten to the University of Miami, where I am now. And I serve as editor-in-chief of the field's flagship journal, Evolution and Human Behavior. And I've trained graduate students in a variety of areas. And in general, I feel quite lucky.
Do you remember what that one is? Was there like a singular moment in that first class, that upper division biology class that you had mentioned taking, that really just like, was there a theory or a thought or an idea that crossed your mind that was just like, you felt like hooked from that moment forward? Or was it really just that perfect storm?
I'll tell you, I know exactly what it was. And it was, so I know this sounds super cheesy, but I think this has kind of been my MO for my entire life. But in the forward, or the first introduction part of The Adapted Mind, when they were talking about how the social sciences were like theoretical islands unto themselves and weren't integrated in any way to understand the one species that they all dealt with. And I just thought, this can't be so. And to be honest with you, I thought there's a good fight out there. I'm suiting up, put me in, coach, kind of thing. Like, I want in. There's some misunderstanding, and in a fundamental way, I think some people are just flat out incorrect. And I wanted to get to the bottom of it and understand it. So no, I heard the war cry in that introductory chapter. And it was, Santa Barbara or bust. And it really was Santa Barbara or bust because, nothing kept me away. It was the 500-year flood when I went out to go visit Santa Barbara. And I was like, nope, I'll swim. I'll swim right through it. So no, it was really seeing that there was a large misunderstanding of how to apply biological principles to understand humans that really spoke to me.
And what was your experience like at UCSB?
How long do you got?
Yeah.
It was a training. It was a graduate training. There is a fantastic book called The Shape of Thought, written by Clark Barrett, that if you have a chance to read, I highly recommend. And it's basically, that was like my graduate training right there, in terms of the influence of multiple fields. So anthropology, cognitive development, philosophy of mind, evolutionary biology, cognitive science, neuroscience. I mean, all of it kind of comes together. And so, but that's the training, because evolutionary psychology isn't a slice of the pie. So, social psychology, cognitive psychology, developmental psychology, neuroscience, clinical, these are all slices of, the different areas of psychology. And evolutionary psychology is just an approach to it all. And so, and because of that, the training was really cross-disciplinary in many ways. I mean, some of the folks in my lab, studied economics, and some were doing neuroscience. And so it was quite a lab. It was pretty intense. It was challenging, and I miss it. I miss it. It was really great.
Mm. What were some of the major focuses of your work and research while you were there?
So while I was there, my main focus was on kinship. And so early on, my advisors started me on a project to identify how it is humans come to learn who counts as a close genetic relative. So who's your family? It sounds like a very strange question until you think that other animals do this without language, without culture, without, the mama bear saying, be nice to your sister, kind of thing. And there's good reasons why we should expect to see mental apps or pieces of, neural circuitry and mental software that allow us to identify who, with greater probability than average, has a good chance of being a close genetic relative. And it's good to know for two reasons. First, being altruistic towards them. So any type of code in me that can somehow identify the other individuals out there that might be carrying the same, random code, as mutated as it might be, and help that individual, that code's going to increase in frequency, and so forth. So altruism is certainly one route to altruism, is identifying individuals who tend to share the same genes or have a better than average probability of doing so. But the other reason is because of it's good enough to mate with your close genetic relatives. So they're deleterious consequences of selecting a close genetic relative as a sexual partner. And because of that, these two very different motivational systems, you've got altruism and you've got sexual motivations, which do seem kind of opposite, very different kinds of systems, but they're connected in at least one way, which is the fact that they both take as input an estimate of relatedness. And so the question is, how do we figure this out? Is it, there's a variety of, and the answer to that question, you have to consult, deep history. What kinds of information would have been available in ancestral environments to craft and shape the neural circuitry in order to allow us to do that? And so if you think about the types of close genetic relatives, the question, becomes more narrow. What kinds of information would have cued someone as being your mother, your father, your sibling, or your offspring? And so, and to the extent those questions differ depending on whether you're male or female, you might end up with different types of solutions. So I started thinking about siblings when I was in graduate school. And the main thrust of my research was to see whether or not childhood co-residence duration, which had been proposed as a cue by a Finnish social scientist, Edward Westermark, to kind of bring that into the lab to see whether or not that predicted both altruistic motivations towards siblings and also sexual aversions. And to make a long story short, it does.
That's interesting too, because it makes me think about the idea, because I'm quite certain that humans are not the only animal species that undergo like adoption, right? I think primates, if there's a relative that has been killed, other family members within the same tribe of other primates will take in a close relative of animal species. So that's kind of an interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that is kind of an interesting connection to where like that would be genetically maybe a positive thing to do, because you're just ruling out the option of that future mating potential of those individuals. So, do you look at primates and how there's like relatedness in behavior from that aspect when you're looking at like these types of behaviors and how they're like ingrained in human behavior?
So in terms of the adoption, I'm not as familiar with the adoption stuff, but there's okay. Probably experts you can talk to about that. I would say that adoption probably isn't all that as common as we might think in non-human primates. I mean, I do and have seen it occur for sure, where females will, take, especially if they've lost an infant, will certainly kind of continue to have that mothering instinct and just kind of take up another infant and care for it. And so I have absolutely seen that. Whether or not that's soothing or it's fulfilling some other, genetic need, I wouldn't be able to necessarily speak to that as clearly. So can you ask me your question again? So in terms of like humans, we do see, siblings, so humans and non-human primates, it ends up that social species, one of the cues you can use is this identification of who is mom and who is mom investing in other than me. And it does look like this is a cue that many other species do use. And it also seems to regulate altruistic tendencies. So who are you going to play fight with versus try and kill? And also, who am I not going to mate with? And so, so the second part of that, who am I not going to mate with? That's going to depend on, so you might say, oh my God, all these, animals in the zoo, and I've heard all other animals, they commit incest, but not humans. It ends up that you expect to see very strong inbreeding aversions in species that typically tended to grow up around and spend extended durations of time during sexual maturity around close genetic relatives. So if you're talking about a species where the female leaves and is never going to see home again, and then happens to run into her brother, well, this was probably uncommon ancestrally. But humans, we stick around our nuclear family throughout the entire durations, especially during periods of sexual maturity. So that's why you expect to see really strong inbreeding aversions in humans. But you see the same kinds of things in other animals. It's just a matter of how are they figuring it out. For us, I would tend to think it's for siblings. It centers a lot around the mom, also dad, but I think I'd place my money on mom more so. So if I see my mom breastfeeding another child, that younger child, it doesn't matter how long I live with that child is my sibling, has a good chance of being a close genetic relative. And it's a very potent cue, seeing your mom pregnant and breastfeeding. And you might be like, I don't remember that at 3 years old. Remember, a lot of information is getting in and kind of being stored, and you're tracking things. Doesn't necessarily mean all of it has to be consciously accessed and remembered, but it's updating information as it comes in. And so that's likely what's happening with the siblingship. But if you're that younger sibling, and you come into this world and you're just like walking around like, oh my God, who's a potential older sibling? That's when you're relying on this co-residence duration, which is probably better described as periods of shared parental investment, codependency on the same caregivers. So if you're a younger sibling, you're looking around being like, okay, which older individuals here are being fed by, cared for by the same individuals, being yelled at by the same individuals, being tended to when sick by the same individuals, and protecting and so forth. And so using this information over the long haul ends up increasing the certainty that, this person, they're probably a sibling.
I think about is there any initial fear of my resources being taken away with a sibling? Like being an older sibling, seeing your younger sibling start to be closer with your mom. Is there that initial threat before the really connection and altruistic behavior or play?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question as to when that altruistic behavior really kicks in, right? So it's sibling rivalry is real. And, I could have been a far nicer older sister. So, as my sister will attest, I was really nasty at some points. And I wonder, what was I thinking? She's, I'm so lucky to have her now. But when I was younger, it was like, oh my God, everything just got split in half. It's like a divorce. It's like, what's going on now? I think that there's absolutely a lot of jealousy. Cultivating value and showing parents that you're valuable and worthy of investment and continued investment is something I think that all siblings feel. And certainly the more mouths to feed, the more you have to differentiate and brand. So.
Yeah, what I was thinking too, to pull the family dynamic one layer out and talk about family units within a greater tribe, do we see any differences in, because I'm thinking evolutionarily too, as we've come together and been a tribal species, does the framework hold true where people within your tribe would be getting a similar connectedness and treatment towards and seeking to protect them as opposed to outsiders? Could you just keep going out and the fundamental piece of what you're saying would be the same the bigger the group gets?
So I think this is a great question. And so I would say that what you're describing is in an ancestral, group of 300 people, let's just say, people are going to be highly related in general, right? So, but think about the problem now to be solved. So among the individuals who are now more related, certainly than we would be from our neighbors here today, the problem is even more dire. How do I absolutely steer clear of nuclear family members? So given that everyone is out and about and interacting, how did evolution carve between sibling, do not marry, not sibling, marriageable, And so, although we should probably not be talking about marriage, I can be sexually attracted, sex and marriage, they correlate, but not at 1.0. So, but the idea that you have, sexual preferences, natural selection should have tinkered with those preferences to absolutely cause someone to be more averse towards individuals who are more likely to be siblings versus, maybe even half siblings, certainly cousins for sure. And so the dangers of inbreeding fall off quite rapidly. But, nevertheless, so what you're talking about is, this extension of altruism as you go out. I think in general, you have a larger degree of relatedness on average among a group, among ancestral groups. But remember, there's a lot of arguments and conflict that can arise as well, leading to the fissioning of groups, which is often what happens. And Nap Shagnon describes a lot of these things when he talks about the Yanomamo. I don't know if you guys have read the Noble Savages, but it's in his other books, but it's fantastic. And so it gives you a real snapshot of what ancestral life, could have been like. And so as you move out, I think that forming coalitions would have always been important. So one individual only carries so much leverage in an interaction. And so being able to coordinate, mentally and physically coordinate with other people would have upped the leverage of any, of one side. And this was hugely important, especially when there was, ongoing warfare and that there were skirmishes within a group. So I think that what you're describing is, it's a dynamic system. So you have all these little nuclear kin groups for sure. But within that, you have people vying for these coalitions. And certainly when the whole group is under attack, everyone commonly values their welfare, and people can come back together. So I think it's just so it's not necessarily kinship per se. There's other circuitry that that kicks in to regulate who to value, who to coordinate with for the current purposes.
Yeah, and so now moving in, I know that you've done a lot of work with Disgust, the book that you co-authored, Objection. Can you tell me, I guess, just a little bit about how you got into that topic in general? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it ends up that, so in graduate school, I was doing research on these kinship cues, and I just assumed that people would grant me that it's the emotion of disgust that gets activated when thinking about sex with one's family members. It seemed obvious to me, but it was a good comment, and it was actually a professor in this social psych area. I was giving a colloquium in the social psych area, and I was questioned, how do you know it's disgust? And I was like, so I said to him, imagine having sex with your mother. Can we just end this conversation right now? It's disgust.
Yeah,
Sorry.
What did you just feel?
Yeah. And so he's like, I understand what you're saying, but you're not distinguishing it potentially from other emotions, and you can't just go with a common assumption. And I completely agreed. And so part of my research then turned to, before I got to the kinship stuff, I actually had to turn to say, okay, we're going to talk about our outcome measures and the systems that get regulated by by kinship and talk about sexual aversions, well, it seems like disgust is this thing. And I had to go in, what is disgust? And at the time, Paul Rozin, Jonathan Haidt were some of the leading figures and scholars talking about disgust. I should also add in Val Curtis and others as well. So I had plenty to learn about disgust, but the more I started to read that literature, it was more and more clear to me that people hadn't carved nature by its joints in a way that was satisfying to me. So the idea that there's this animal reminder disgust. And I was like, you mean anything that reminds me that I'm an animal is going to cause me disgust? I was like, I can think of like a million things right off the bat that don't seem to disgust me, yet I can associate with other animals. And so it just didn't seem that Rozin and Haidt had necessarily carved disgust correctly. And so what I set about doing was these were the initial approach to all of this. And it seemed to me that there were three different chunks of disgust. There was this pathogen thing, that there was this sex thing, and I couldn't escape it, but there was this moral thing. You can't not say morality when you talk about disgust. And so nevertheless, what I did in graduate school is I ended up learning the facial action coding system, which is a system developed by Paul Ekman. And he basically understands the musculature of the human face and how each of those muscles moves, and then what muscles are associated with producing different types of emotions. And so what I did is I videotaped subjects as they were reading a particular act on a screen, and then basically coded whether or not they activated the muscles that are associated with disgust, which is the nose wrinkle and the lip raiser. Can't really do it right now. And so there's particular muscles that are associated with that, and you can kind of frame by frame kind of going through all of this stuff. But I also coded for smiles. I coded for, these kind of angry, the 11s. And so I coded for all of that. And lo and behold, of course, what I found was that people, in fact, make far more disgust faces to things like poop, vomit, unclean toilets and all these different things, and then sex acts and then immoral acts. So it actually, immoral acts, yes, people made disgust faces towards, but certainly not as much as they did, sexual acts and pathogen acts. And so I had my evidence that, okay, it's disgust, fantastic. I also did surveys. I found it was discussed 5 different ways, in addition to just walking around being like, hey, imagine tongue kissing your sister. And people, so I pinned that one down. So disgust it is. And after graduate school, I started working heavily with Josh Teiber, who's in Amsterdam now at the VU, and he and I and other colleagues started to think about the different domains of disgust, and we wrote a sequence of papers talking about the evolved function of disgust, and we chopped it into pathogen, sexual, and moral disgust. And we developed a scale to measure it. I even did some neuroscience work looking to see whether or not there's different areas of the brain that have to do with pathogen, sexual, and moral disgust. With a colleague, Kent Keel, out at University of New Mexico. So it was an interesting run talking about disgust, but it all started because I needed a dependent measure that I had validated in order to be able to determine, co-residence duration is affecting people, how it causes them to get more disgusted. And in fact, that is what we found. So with my graduate advisors, John Tooby and Lita Cosmides, who I went out to Santa Barbara to study with, we found that for the younger sibling in a sib pair, the longer you lived with that older sibling, the more grossed out you were at sexual acts with that sibling. However, if you were that older sibling and you were asked about your younger sibling, it didn't matter how long you lived with that younger sibling. All levels of co-residence yielded maximal levels of disgust. And we suggested that there's another cue the mind uses, which is this observing your mother caring for a newborn. That is this potent cue that then kind of makes unnecessary this cue of co-residence. It trumps it, basically. So you might still be recording co-residence duration and who is this child receiving care from, but you don't need it only because you have you have this more potent cue. So that's where all the disgust work comes from. But you mentioned objection, and it ends up that one of my graduate students came to me as a lawyer, and it still boggles my mind. He's like, yeah, I don't want to be a lawyer anymore. And I'm like, oh my God, like you're giving up a lucrative career to do what? Like, what's wrong with you? And his wife is like, what's wrong with you? Everyone's like, what's going on? But he's fantastic. So Carlton Patrick came to work with me, and it just seemed, again, the stars aligned. And it was just, I'd been very interested. I had been scared by this topic of morality because, it's been discussed for centuries and no one really has. I mean, if we had an answer to it, it wouldn't still be a mystery. We wouldn't still be talking about it in the ways that we are. And so when I first started thinking about morality and the law and disgust, first I was like, oh yeah, I already have a theory on disgust. It's pathogen, it's sexual and moral. We'll just write the book and we'll relate it to law. It should be no problem. And that was all fine and dandy until it actually came to writing the section on morality. And I was like, can't we just skip to the law? And it ends up that the whole book changed and our whole idea of disgust changed. So disgust, I'm sorry, I've been talking forever. See, this is what happens.
Please keep going.
Send me going, and she doesn't stop.
This is great.
So it ends up that I can give you a better idea of what disgust is, at least from the work that I've done and the thinking I've done on the topic. And I'm sure other people have different ways of thinking about it, but here it goes. So it ends up disgust is part of our food psychology. And it is one of those systems that is determining what is suitable to eat. And it ends up that Paul Rozin was one of the first people to really emphasize how central food is to disgust. And I think that we need to come back to that literature because I think he had it right. So it ends up that for every morsel that you put in your mouth or everything that you look at, potentially, you are evaluating what is the expected value of consumption? Like what's the expected fitness value of consuming this thing, this thing here. And it ends up that you're evaluating it in a variety of different ways. There's mechanical ways, chemical ways, and then, in terms of the nutrients it might hold. I should say the chemical, I meant more toxins. But you're evaluating things based on sugar contents, salt, umami kinds of things, so protein, amino acid content maybe. But certainly you're evaluating things on what's the likelihood that this contains microorganisms, and what's the likelihood this contains toxins, secondary compounds produced by plants that are poisonous and toxic to our system. And it ends up that all of this information is evaluated, and when it all comes together, it produces this output of the expected value of consumption. And when there's a lot of sugar and one is really hungry and you know what the substance is and know what the food is, you've eaten it before, it hasn't made you sick. I mean, there's a whole laundry list of things that are involved in this computation. But, if it's a piece of pizza, it's like, oh my gosh, scrumptious, and I'll eat it and I'll continue to eat it. But then if you detect that, you smell something or you taste it, it tastes sour, or it has that very bitter taste, it ends up that it's likely not good for you. But all of this is coming together to produce a sense of scrumptiousness or disgustingness. And that low value of expected value of consumption, that is disgust. And it means that even things that are really sweet can cause us disgust. And so you go to a buffet and you're starving, and you'll eat anything. And then your second round, you're still like, oh, I could still go back. And then you go back for a third round. And then finally you're like, oh my God, another bite, I'm going to vomit. And so, people, and then you even try and feed someone something after that. And they're like, no, really, and so, but it's an aversion. It's still disgust. It's not as intense as if you saw maggots crawling out of a piece of meat, nor should it be, because it's not as intense, as costly to consume potentially. But nevertheless, it's kind of a lower value of consumption. With each bite of food, the next bite becomes less and less valuable. And that is actually modulated by this expected fitness value of consuming an item. And so that's one way disgust is, regulates a lot of our behaviors in this food psychology. And then the other way is by contact. So it regulates what to touch. And so identifying surfaces that look like it could be slimy and so forth. It's funny. I have been reading Nat Shagnon's noble savages. And he describes situations. So our disgust sensitivity in this modern world where everything's like generally clean and people, take showers, and it's very different than the ancestral world. Very different. I mean, Knapp talks about stories where, they're just kind of, just blowing their nose and doing things that you're just like, oh my God, thank God I'm not an anthropologist. And so, but I think the take home point is that in an environment in which this was occurring, and you might have come into contact with a variety of body fluids and so forth, what is the machinery that's guiding what's safe to eat and touch versus not safe? And certainly when it comes to other humans who you can contract diseases from, knowing like what's safe to touch, on another person, like, oh, there's a bloody pussy thing here. Let me check that out, And so, you just don't, what are kind of the decision rules there? So after consumption, there's certainly contact. And then sex was the other big domain of disgust. So knowing, but again, as with the food, disgust is part of the entire mating system, right? It's on the opposite end of lust, right? So if you have all the things that come in to, evaluate a particular individual as a sexual partner and you find them really uber high, it's like, all systems go, activate lust, and sexual desire. And then if it's really low for any of many reasons, including they are kin, then that kind of expected value as a sexual partner just plummets. So expected sexual value is the variable that when it's really high, you're going to experience lust and sexual desire. When it's really low, by virtue of our software, that's where disgust comes from. Period.
Yeah. So going a bit deeper into like disgust and morality, I guess could you share a bit more about that? Being that, like, from what I'm taking away is that disgust allows us to make certain decisions, and like morality, they can be right or wrong. Can you expand on it a bit more, I guess, or is that somewhat right?
So it ends up that the words right and wrong to me have taken on a whole new meaning after thinking a lot about morality. And so the picture of disgust that I shared with you just, a second ago, where disgust regulates consumption, contact, and sex, leaves out morality. And that's because when Carlton and I were thinking about it, we basically threw out the first draft of the book and started again, because it was like, oh my God, we've been so narrow in our focus that we need to zoom out and see a larger picture here. And it was clear that the expected value of consumption, expected value of contact, and expected sexual value were three inputs into a morality system. And I actually don't even want to call it a morality system, because the word morality to me nowadays just, well, whatever. And so I'd like to call it a social value system. And so, because I believe that's what we are referring to. I'm happy to debate someone on that one. And so, but this social value system, or I like to call it why we give a rat's ass about any one system, is something that is going to take as input a variety of factors that guide whether or not you're altruistic or competitive or exploitative, towards someone. Why do I care about you at all? A question I ask myself a lot these days. And
I was going to say, it kind of seems like maybe the morality piece is almost like a subjective piece, because in a way, the level, I really actually like thinking about the morality piece as like a value of input, just like the food one. How much nutritional value is this providing to my system? Well, when I think about morality, it's a subjective scale, and that each individual's interpretation of the moral value of the input is going to be completely different. So it's going to be constantly all over the place, because like Nick and I are going to have different opinions on a topic, and then the three of us are all going to have different opinions. So it just becomes an extremely difficult thing to measure, it would seem like.
Yeah, no, I think you said the right word, which is subjective. And so if you buy into the fact that it is about social value, or at least let's talk about social value, and then you can see whether or not this maps onto the idea of morality, and whether or not it does is whatever. So, but why you care about other people from an evolutionary perspective, you might think, okay, well, obviously kinship. We know we can all agree about that, right? So kinship is one reason why I would trade off my own welfare and care about you. That's one reason. But also there are close relationships beyond kin, so friends. And so John Tooby and Lita Cosmides have talked a lot about friendships in one of my favorite papers of theirs called The Banker's Paradox. And they basically talk about this idea of association value, that you assess, how you value other people. So the social value you perceive others to hold, but then you're also sensitive to whether or not they value you in return. And close friendships are typically marked when, you have, I value you quite highly and you value me quite highly. So the idea of independent of kinship, independent of kinship, I can value you and you can value me. Why? Because you provide me benefits that I can't get anywhere else. And you're an ally, or you like to play golf, or you will, I don't know, whatever. We have friends for all sorts of different reasons. You like to shop with me. You like to talk about evolutionary psychology. So there are a lot of reasons why you might have friends and why you might value certain people, and why they might value you. And so those are two additional inputs into a system that assesses when to trade off my welfare for someone else, how much I value that person based on benefits and affordances they offer, and also how much they value me. But then there's a couple of other reasons why I would have to care for you. So it ends up, if you're bigger than me. I mean, this might be association value and why I value you, but in general, if you're physically formidable, in general, I will defer. I will get out of the way and defer. And even young infants have an idea of that larger size trumps smaller size when getting their way. And so it's an interesting dimension that seems to be to track a lot of our attitudes and expectations. But then there's the last one that I've thought of is, you might not be kin, I might have to respect you, obviously we could be friends, or, I might respect you because you're bigger than me. And the other reason is because I could be condemned by the group if I don't. So I might not like you at all, but I know that there's a group that's going to coordinate and exploit and target me if I'm not nice to you. So begrudgingly, I will be nice to you. And, I'll do the minimum I have to do in order to get by without being targeted and condemned and punished by the group. So I think norms are huge. And it's absolutely what you see happening today. So I wasn't going to go there, but we're talking about morality and groups and coalitions and norms. But, the idea that people are very concerned about their actions, given that they perceive groups to be at the ready to cancel them. And so this is a huge component of what's going on right now. I mean, I'm sitting back and watching this, and it's textbook, but it's also really, I hate to say it, it's disgusting to me. But that's because I don't want it to happen. I want to make sure that all of you knew I don't think it should be happening, and coordinate all of you to stop it from happening. So, but it ends up that's why you care about other people. And that's why we hold social value for other people. All of those reasons are why I would ever trade my life for yours, and why I would give you the shirt off my back and so forth. And so where does this leave us with morality? And disgust. So it ends up, disgust can influence my social value for you, all the reasons why I value you. You eat the things that I either love, and you prepare them, and I love that. And so you have high social value, right? Or you eat things to me that are foreign, novel, and just smell really bad to my nose. And so yuck. And so that's going to decrease social value. You tend to come into contact with substances, and maybe your job is something that brings you into contact with things. Or your sexual behavior makes me think of things that disgust me. So there are a lot of ways that are going to cause sexual value to decrease. and me to lower my value of you. And so that's going to differ depending, of course, on the person, but it's going to differ for men and for women in general. It's going to differ for heterosexuals and homosexuals. And so each person, I think, you said it perfectly. It's subjective in many ways about the things that you value and the things that you're going to hold high versus low value for. But this is the system that's really generating motivations to care for. And so that's one thing. But it ends up that disgust gets into the picture in a completely different way. So if that's social value, the question of is, what does this system do? And it ends up that humans, so social value is important for a couple of reasons, and it interfaces with two other systems that we talk about in the book. And that's that, first off, males compete with each other for resources, right? And so you have the ability for men to band together, coordinate their actions in order to secure resources. Whether that means other females, territory, land, food, it's just basically the idea that males of many species are after resources because that tends to be the kinds of things that attract more females. So I don't think I'm saying anything too provocative that males seek resources. It's only in academia that such things are provocative. You walk outside the halls of academia, everyone's like, duh. But in any case, because men can do this, when that interfaces with a sense of social value about who holds resources, who are the competitors for resources in my world, who am I going to eliminate as being mouths to feed on these resources? Who am I going to share these resources with? And that's what consults this social value system. And I think it's even more nefarious than this. I think that there's motivations to actually form coordinated coalitions to target groups of low social value, shared perceived low social value. And I say this because if you look at chimp behavior, the work of Jane Goodall, Richard Wrangham, Michael Wilson, a variety of primatologists and anthropologists show that chimps will patrol their areas, but it's not just in defense. It's not just like, let's, walk the wall and make sure no one's going to try and steal our, our food or women or, or kill us. It's an offensive. And so males will make these lethal incursions into neighboring groups and try to pick off lone males, especially when their numbers are in their favor. So if there are 3 males patrolling and they sense that there's only 1 male out there, they will close in really rapidly in order to try and kill that male. This isn't, and so it is a targeting in order to eliminate other males from banding together first in order to get resources. And I think that we have taken that capacity to new heights or depths. And, I think that humans do this and they couch that coordination in the term morality. And I know that sounds awful, but I think that I have not, so far I've not read something that has forced me to reconsider that position. And so disgust ends up entering into this scene in really interesting ways. So disgust tells me what's low social value for me, like the foods I personally don't want to eat, the people I personally don't want to have sex with, and the things I don't personally want to touch, and that's pretty good for me. But it ends up that, if suddenly people, so that's one way I can use to kind of see whether or not other people might share those same disgusts. And if I'm so motivated, I can form a band and go after them for that reason. I'm a female, so the idea of forming a band to go after and kill people is just kind of strange. But this is what men have done, through cultures and through time. And so it must not seem so strange to some people. But seems to be what happens. And then not only that, when you hear other people talking about disgust that, this behavior disgusts me, that behavior disgusts me, they're kind of advertising, this is the kind of behavior that I would be willing to form a coalition, against, so it's kind of like running it up the flagpole, like that's disgusting. And so, imagine, you see someone run a red light and it's like, oh, that's so disgusting, or, do something and you're like, it's disgusting. But imagine if you're with 10 other people and they're like, yeah, that's really disgusting. It's like, and you're off to the races, it's like, let's get them. I mean, it's as easy as that. And so disgust can coordinate like that. But even more so, disgust offers a shield. Once you know, so this is what I love about actually, it's not what I like about today, but it's certainly on display. But the idea is once you know the landscape of the different coalitions that are out there, the different groups that are forming, and, suddenly now to protect yourself against being targeted by groups that seem to be growing in power and leverage in the landscape, you can actually start using disgust to say, take your sights off of me. I'm one of you. So, if you are gay and suddenly now you're living in a place where people rally against homosexuality, you're going to speak from the pulpit saying how gross and disgusting such behavior is, and we should be condemning this kind of stuff. Always have to be careful about people screaming the loudest about things. And so, but nevertheless, this is one way to say, guns, they're disgusting. No, but you wouldn't say that in an NRA rally. And so very similar to what's happening that now is kind of washing through academia and liberal academia, which is that, people are very scared. There's what seems to be a strong coalition. I would argue it's not as strong as people would indicate it is, but it ends up that people are scared. And they are afraid to counter coalitions that seem to be ever rising in power. And so now it is, canceling people and basically saying, I'm with the growing majority. I'm sorry, and it's ruining higher education in ways that are really significant. And I'm a little passionate about that, but maybe that's all I'll say about that. Hence this background. And so in any case, so disgust interfaces with our social value system by identifying who we value least, but also relies on coordination systems and also motivations to acquire resources. And that's, typically found in male minds who are, not that females don't have this sensibility, it just tends to be on average more present in male minds who tend, and not all males, who tend to form coalitions to, secure resources.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely agree with your sentiment towards the current state of higher education. I mean, I just don't understand how we've gotten to a point where, being able to ask questions and be wrong and undergo a normal scientific inquiry about a topic just to come to a reasonable conclusion can in certain subject matters just be completely shut down. It's kind of, it's scary that we're going to this place. And I think there's a lot of people being silenced for wrong reasons. So,
well, it's, to be honest with you, I would have looked towards the leadership of universities. Maybe I'm naive, but I would have looked towards the people who have to answer to boards of directors who are the money people. And I would have, and maybe it's coming from them, but I would have thought that someone somewhere would have said, we know what's right. We have all the leverage we need. We're just going to stay the course. And I have yet to see a university. There are a couple of universities actually who have. But I believe that people who think, we'll give this coalition, this movement, whatever they want, and everyone will be happy. Just give them what they want and everyone will go home. I'm thinking to myself, what film are you in? No, this is not reality. People don't say, you know what? We've come this far. We just got this. Let's pack it in and go home and be done. Mm-hmm. You kidding me? It's increasing their leverage.
And it's giving them the ability to say see, we're right. And then it can build and it gets bigger and stronger and worse. And
But you know what? There are people who are working quite hard to ensure that the data, science stay part of, and enlightenment stay part of who we are as Americans. Mm-hmm. And it's an assault on what I feel is being an American. And, this is my coalition, and I don't want it brought down from the inside. And anyway, so there's a lot of interesting things and dynamics going on, but all of it seemed to, conform to these ideas about what people find disgusting, people forming coalitions and targeting and exploiting people. Why? Because they can. I don't know.
Yep.
How did we get to this point? Do you what do you think are some of the factors? So discuss, but definitely how did it get to this huge issue? Is it the expansion of social media and being connected across the nation, across the world now?
I'm actually, so if you ask me in a few weeks, I might have a better insight into this, into that question. So I'm doing some reading of my own to find out some of the origins. And the little bit I have done suggests that what we're observing with this Black Lives Matters movement is that even if people don't even know this for themselves, but authors who have kind of gone back and kind of really thought about this stuff and movements that happened decades ago, century, really have thought that this is stemming from the French arm of postmodernism. And I don't know if you've encountered postmodernism. I did in my, and as an undergraduate. In fact, that was the professor who called me a anti-feminist Nazi, because I wrote about, we had to dissect Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and we did Machiavelli. And so I basically wanted to understand these texts in the context. I was learning about evolutionary psychology. I was so excited, here's an author writing about human nature. How is that portrayed in these books and all this stuff? And it was fun. It was really great to be able to apply that to literature. And there are people who do that now. And that's when he called, and that's when he said, you're taking this biological perspective and everything has to be respected and everything has an essence. And so I took my pencil and I snapped it and I was like, are there two essences now? I'm just I got to get out of here. This is not working for me. And so, but postmodernism really, they don't like having anything defined. If you define it, then it's you're very much, and not in the spirit of postmodernism, because they don't like to be pinned down to anything. But it's extremely it's relativism, it's anti-science, it's anti-objectivity. I mean, that's why you're finding that all of these schools right now are jettisoning the GREs and any type of standardized tests, because it's too objective. And anything objective is inherently racist and sexist. And so, because none of us really know how racist and sexist we really all are. We just all are, and you'll never really know the extent of your malady. And so it's just it's very strange, this way of thinking. It's very anti-scientific, and it's taking hold of our sciences.
Yeah. Another, just to go along with, kind of further Nick's question, and I'd be curious to get your take on it, is the idea of how social media is allowing primarily the youth of the nation to create an identity online that they want to put out into the world and be accepted as a full, complete, developed human self without going through maybe some of the prerequisite psychological development of going through life as a human being. And then taking the reality and the avatar that they create for themselves that they're trying to portray online, which is probably more of an ideal rather than a reality in their life. And then expecting everybody to treat their online avatar as their truest version of themselves, because they put online reality on a pedestal above real life reality. But then at a certain point, they hit an age where they are brought back down to this, well, it's not reality. And now you haven't done any of the psychological development of who you are and what your identity entails. And now your world just literally crumbles, and it creates all of this huge underdeveloped psychology and backlash of people not knowing who they are because they've never been able to go out and test who is Nick really, and how does that cooperate with other people. And it's just creating a giant unraveling of like these people in their late 20s, early 30s who like have never negotiated their identity with society before and have no clue who they are. And now so there's a whole nother piece there. I went on quite the little ramble, but the online space, do you have I guess where I was going with that was, do you have an evolutionary perspective on how human interaction is meant to develop and how maybe it's been perverted through social media?
Well, I'm happy to jump up and down on social media. However, I do. So first off, if this is what people want to do, I think people should be free to do what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's their decision,
totally.
And I'm very happy to, fight for their freedom to do that. So it's not a choice I would make. And so once they, you're telling me we're not producing warriors in this isn't the method for producing warriors. No, I would say that, so an evolutionary perspective on social media in terms of social development. Yeah, I think that when you are talking about an ancestral environment where people are face to face and are capable of actually understanding another person's mindset and intentions based on not only their vocal qualities, but facial expressions and body posture and so forth, it provides an interesting ability. It certainly helps calibrate and get one sensitive to how to deal with other humans and what things could mean. And when those pieces of information are removed, I think that we're just going to find that either we're relying on other pieces of information that might be poorer quality, although some, listen, don't knock it. There could be things that are better quality in social media.
Sure, yeah.
I don't know, nothing springs to mind, but leave open that possibility. And so I would say, social media saved our butts during this pandemic in a way. Yep. And so not only that, I would say social media is one way that, for better or worse, social media allows people to coordinate, and it allows people to see the representation of a great set of variation, or all the variation that exists in the land, right? And so what's interesting about, it used to be that, being gay was something that was, forbidden and taboo, and people had to hide. And so that's just not the case anymore. And social media has a large, we can thank social media for that in large part, because suddenly now it was like, oh no, there's not just this one guy in your town who's gay. There's millions of them. and so, but to the eyeballs, right? It's like, oh my gosh, there's like a large faction of people who have these preferences. And suddenly now that leverage, goes from all the way to, why, and so I think it does certain things to the brain in the sense of reassessing the formidability and the power of a group when you start to see that numbers are far higher than you had expected or thought. And so I think that in that particular case, it actually was a really good thing. I mean, it's so boring to be gay now. And so, in many parts of the country, it's like, I'm gay. It's like, okay. It's like parents are like expecting it from their kids. It's like, okay, honey, okay, have a nice day. I got to go to work. And so, but I mean, obviously that's not everywhere, but I think in large part due to the fact that, it's made its way around social media and people are talking about it far more. I don't know. I think that's been, my personal opinion is that's been all to the good. Will it have downsides in terms of, we'll all be more tolerant of certain things, but social morons, sure. I think that's probably going to be the case.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting to think about those benefits. And then also, like we've been saying too, think about how like, oh yeah, there are so many other people who disagree with this topic like me. Like, let's form this coalition and disagree as a group. Because like we're saying, like that's probably only happening in small groups if we don't have these really huge social connections across the nation. But now we're able to form these huge Facebook groups or anything like that, or something on Discord. And like you can really come together against something, which can be beneficial, can also have negative consequences. But yeah, I guess it's like the give and the take and the balance that we find with this ever expanding thing that I guess we're always trying to understand.
No, it's true. It's true. And so, you brought up the topic of right and wrong and good and bad. And so, but those are terms that are very much derived from a coalitional psychology, in the sense of, I'm basically, this is good. And if you're like, no, it's not, then I'm like, oh, I don't know that you're such a cooperator, and so I think those are litmus tests to see whether or not you are simpatico with people who are around you. So, this is wrong, and if you heard everyone around you be like, no, it's not, it's right. And so, or if this is right, no, it's wrong. It's very interesting how being the minority on the right and the wrong, but I think it's an expression of this idea, this concept, this group of people, this act is that which we will exploit and punish and target, or the one that we are going to praise and laud. And so I think that, even the words good, bad, right, and wrong make me nervous, along with anytime I hear, that's wrong, I think to myself, And so, but I listen, it should come as no surprise at this point. And as soon as I hear that something's wrong, I'm like, is it? Has it always been wrong? Would it be wrong? So it's just an interesting perspective to take when you hear people talk in such strong language. They're motivated. They're motivated to do something. They're trying to kind of infect your mind with ideas and to see if you will join the dark side.
Well, and another thing I think is really important to note on the social media front, and I'd be curious to get your opinion of this and then go into maybe a little bit of the work you've done on the topic. But I think there's a big disconnect on person-to-person interaction and how gratitude can be perceived when done digitally, because a lot of your research that you've done has been in how gratitude, there's a response, a give and take, and like the affirmation of the receiving of something that kind of creates this unspoken contract of, hey, like, I appreciate you doing that, and I may be interested in doing that for you in the future, which can like build a lot of connection between two people. I guess I'm more so making a statement that I think that's sorely missing, and it's much more difficult to obtain in the digital space. But could you tell us a little bit more about how you see gratitude as a utility from the evolutionary perspective as well?
Sure. So I think you're right. I think there are missed opportunities that are online. And so I'm always encouraging my son. It's like, give your teacher a call, because he can do that with this online stuff that he's doing. I'm like, give her a call. I was like, it's going to go far. Trust me. I'm trying to like make this kid even more of a weasel and devil, and know how to like work the system here. I'm like, just give her a call. Don't just text.
Oh, I was referred to in front of my entire class in undergrad as a schmoozer because I brought my teacher a coffee when I showed up late. And it was just like, hey, I'm trying to show that I'm not taking her for granted here. I appreciate what she does, and I'm sorry I was late. So, Hey, be a schmoozer. I fully support this.
You know what? Schmoozers get ahead in this world, especially, polite,
I've been doing a lot of schmoozing.
Schmoozers. So it's, networking is really important. But, gratitude. So it ends up that I left the disgust world, so put on my nice hat now. And although, believe it or not, I'll take it off. I'm really going to talk about the same kind of strategic things that disgust and morality do. And so I told you about this paper, The Banker's Paradox. That was one of my favorite papers by John Truby and Lita Cosmides that talked about how you can, the alternate avenues to altruism. And that was through identifying people who hold value and value you. And in there, and that's the paper that really got me started thinking about gratitude, because in order to get that ball rolling, so someone else, you notice someone else, and they are So we talk about externalities and affordances. You probably talk about something similar in the business world, right? That people can have positive externalities, positive affordances in terms of the benefits that they offer, but you can also assess the costs that they might impose. So you have always kind of this trade-off between, positive versus negative externalities. And so, the example that my advisors used to give, which is dated, but I'm going to give their example. They're like Mick Jagger, everyone who like hung around Mick Jagger had so many positive affordances, right? So you just wanted to be around him because what came with Mick Jagger? Well, you got, women and drugs and booze and all this fun stuff, right? So the idea that all these positive affordances can be literally dripping off of people. And, the idea that to the extent that you can make yourself valued to those individuals, you might be the recipient of such benefits. And so I know that sounds callous, so births friendships. So here we go. So this is, the origin story of friendships. And so basically, if I show that I valued you for this thing that you did, you killed a snake next to my campsite or something, that's it's a positive affordance, that's pretty good. And so I value you for that. And so the idea, to the extent that I can positively reinforce that and have you identify that that's the reason why I'm trying to reinforce that type of behavior. I'm basically saying that their behavior that you just done did, I'd like you to keep doing it. I'd appreciate it very much. And so I'm basically indicating I hold that to be of value. Now, if you're just like, who are you? It was near my tent too, and so clearly you're not showing that you are looking for, you're not looking to cultivate any value from my direction, but instead you're like, oh yeah, not a problem, of course. And so the response that you get from people when you thank them for doing something, so being thanked for doing something is quite telling. It tells who is valuing me for particular actions. But then your response back to them is kind of reciprocal. And I am showing that I value you or potentially might. It's words, not actions. And so you always have to be careful with that. And so, but the idea is that gratitude, when you benefit me and deliver a benefit to me, I feel gratitude. First off, I had expected you. So gratitude, in our research, there's still some questions in there and different research is suggesting different things. But the way I think it's happening is that if you're a stranger, I expect bupkis from you. And if you do something nice to me, you have far exceeded my expectation. And that delta very much predicts the extent of my gratitude, right? And so if it's nothing, or if it's lower than I expected, and you didn't regard me as I thought you should have, that's a negative delta, and that will spark anger. But the idea that to the extent that you exceed my expectations in how you treat me, that's going to trigger gratitude and motivations to try to positively reinforce those behaviors, and with the promise of future reciprocal and downstream benefits. And so gratitude is really critical in jumpstarting friendships. They help identify benefits and they help communicate where you feel that people are beneficial to you. And it's the different communications of it. So you're talking about social media and online. It's like, if there's just one emoji for gratitude, right? And I don't even know what that would be, like this, or like with a hat tilt. I don't even know if they have an emoji like this, like the gratitude emoji, like, tip of the hat, hand over heart kind of type of thing. And so that doesn't lack intensity, and it ends up that it's really important. It's like, I do something nice for you and you're like, thanks, and it's like, that tells me something. Or I hear nothing. Ever walk through a set of doors and hold the door for the people behind you and not a peep comes out of their mouth, and then the next bank of doors, you open it and you just let it go. It's like, fend for yourself, people. Yeah. You clearly didn't value me. Yeah, it's not good to walk behind me and not say thank you. I don't expect roses or anything, but just even a, that'll do. It'll do.
It's so interesting to think about if I'm in a coffee shop, a stranger buys me a cup of coffee, I might think like, wow, that is an amazing person. When like a friend who's close to me might buy me a cup of coffee every day, and I just don't even think anything of it.
Yeah, that delta is totally different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, the expectations. And it's like, listen, I still go home for the holidays and my dad's like, here's a little something. And, one year he was like late in doing it. It was like the day I was like leaving for the airport and I was like, what's up? I was thinking to myself, where's my check for the year? I've been a good daughter. I can't listen. I mean, the conversations I have with myself in my head are like, like Ally McBeal moments. And I'm just thinking, finally he gives me a check and I'm like, Deb, you better make sure to really thank him this time. I'm like, oh, Dad, thank you so much. He won't listen to this, so I'm clear. And so, but the idea that, I think that it's a lot about expectations. And so what some of the researchers are doing, and so let me just do a quick shout out to Eric Peterson at UC Boulder. So he is trying to identify more closely, I just forgot whether he's at Boulder or Colorado Springs. I'm sorry, Eric. And so I think he's at Boulder, but he's trying to really understand kind of what the mechanics are and the mental software behind gratitude. And we have debates amongst our team as to what might be really going on. But here is what's clear. The motivation, so the variables that are predicting my gratitude are different than the variables that then predict how cooperative I'm going to be down to you in the future. So even though that violation of expectations, which is where I want to place my money on this system, is, that produces the full range of gratitude kind of things. So communications, behaviors, facial expressions, and all that things that get activated in that. But it ends up that delta in how much I sense that you now value me then gets fed into a system for how much I will value you, right? So I just sense this huge, large delta, like, an uptick in how you value me. Well, that's one input into now how I will value you, that social value we were talking about before, the why give a rat's ass. And I just detected you care about me. And that should absolutely be a reason why I care about you, because among all the people out there, you have shown that you actually are going to do something nice for me. And that means something. And ancestrally, that would have meant a lot. And so that's one input that then goes into how I value you. And that's what predicts then, what I will do, how I will trade off my welfare for you. So we're trying to start to pinpoint the circuitry of gratitude with, a goal of, I think always a fun goal is, because we're trying to reverse engineer the human mental apps. You might imagine that, in a few decades, maybe we can hand over the schematics to the MIT, Imagineers or whatever, whoever's, building the robots that are donning more and more human attributes, but be like, this is what you need in order to, pull off and generate gratitude.
It would seem evolutionarily that it may be very like a strategy for self-preservation to just be gracious towards other people. Because I'm just thinking, like, if you're telling me you're gonna go out and maybe there's a limit, right? Like hey, don't be naive, because you'll get bit by the snake in that instance. But if you go out and put out, your gracious attitude towards other people, you're kind of like inviting that same thing back into your own life in a sense. Like you're offering something that you're, hoping, and without expectation, hopefully, because again, like you said, anger can come out of that as well. But I think there's like a piece there of that good karma, but like the practicality behind karma of like, yeah, if you go out into the world, you do a bunch of good stuff, like you're going to see good stuff. You know what I mean? And it's just going to develop your psychology in a more positive way than not being gracious, pushing everybody away. Like that isolation feeling of that would be not what you would want from an evolutionary standpoint.
No, I think that's a super good point. I mean, look, you have the best chance of having the universe send back good things to you if you're doing good things, right? Or you've got to be really scary and formidable, or have like a lot of money. And so, but the idea that, people oftentimes, I like to consider it like you're going fishing, you're just casting out a whole bunch of lines, and there's a difference between, indebtedness. And so it ends up that, so what we're talking about is not reciprocal altruism. Because if I do something nice for you, because I'm fishing for friends, like I do something nice, I'd be like, hey, you want my last piece of gum? Like you say to a stranger, hey, you're on the plane, would you like a piece of gum or something like this? And so, it's just like, you're doing a nice thing. If they take it and don't do anything back, you haven't been cheated, right? There's no being cheated in that exchange. There was no exchange. But rather, what it is you are taking a risk. You are putting out a benefit and kind of casting out a line to see whether or not that individual might be a recipient and might be willing to, value you for having done so. And so in modern times on a plane, you might be like, I'm not looking to make a friend on a plane. That's fine. But in ancestral times where all of these systems and circuitry evolved and what they're sensitive to, doing something nice for someone and having someone value you could have meant the difference between life and death. And so, we don't play with live ammo in modern worlds. And so we can just kind of, enjoy our suite of mental adaptations and, play around with them. Ancestrally, they would have, again, life, hung in the balance. But the idea that even gratitude is so that's why I took off my hat and threw it on the ground, because it's, it's a strategic emotion. It is basically saying who is providing benefits in this current world, who is, the most, who do I think I could possibly get close enough to do something that might be of value to, and let me try and aim really high or I'm gonna aim really low. And so different people are different ways. And, what is the makeup of the person that you're talking about? Like, what are your particular preferences, and who might share those preferences with you? Because that kind of commonality is one way in to kind of generate this sense of similarity and so forth. That might help cultivate these types of relationships, because if you're similar and you enjoy certain things, then I can value you for enjoying and transforming the world in the same way I would. So it ends up that gratitude is very much looking to exploit the benefits that other people offer by positively reinforcing it when necessary and negatively reinforcing it when people don't value you, right? So you should be treating me better. I mean, there are people who walk around angry all the time, right? With a big old chip on their shoulder. No one treats me how I should be treated. I deserve better than this. It's just like, they're there.
You're so
like,
ungrateful.
Another 20 years, that'll smooth out those rough edges. And so, but the idea that, people sometimes when they're expecting so much, they're walking around angry that it's not being delivered all of the time. And so it's in the same way that people are trying to negatively reinforce what they perceive as the imposition of costs to change people's behaviors into increasing how they value them and delivering greater benefits. And so both gratitude and anger are working in very interesting ways in order to improve the treatment that others, improve the regard others hold for us.
Go ahead. Do you have a thought?
Briefly. I just think this is so fascinating, because I think I've only really thought about gratitude in the context of being very personal to me. Like, I need to be grateful for this, and that's going to improve my health, my happiness, and who I feel like I am. And I didn't think too much about the reciprocity piece of it. And it just seems like, man, when there's somebody who I provide a service for who really thanks me for it, it's like, God, I want to do 100 times better next time I do this for them. It's just, it's so net positive when it's framed in that way. So it's really cool.
Gratitude is one of my favorite emotions. And when researchers talked about the universal emotions, they never used to talk about gratitude. And so this is absolutely one that I think is critical to why humans are the way they are. I mean, we are, I'm one of them. And so, but I think that it's important. It's really important in cultivating these important relationships, but it also means that it has a lot of interesting byproducts, right? So when you're in a funk, and a lot of these self-help groups and, weight loss, it's like, if you can put yourself in a mental space that's more positive, you can kind of jumpstart the car in a way, right? So if we know more about this circuitry, what we can do is, realize how valuable we are and how valued and, valuable life is, and kind of focus on that heightened sense of value and worth that I think can generate this gratitude, very much so. I mean, when you look out at the world, I think that and you're like, I'm really grateful to be here. You're pretty much thinking it could be so much worse. And I'm grateful. It's like, so like, look at this, it's not as bad as it could be. And I think that we can definitely use it. I mean, as a clinical intervention, it is something that I think has shown to be quite effective, certainly temporarily. So if ever you're in a funk, trying to focus on like one or two things that you're just really grateful for and just really focusing in on it, I think can be quite helpful.
Yeah. The thought that I'm kind of like working through, and since you two are the professionals and I'm the simpleton of this conversation, please work through this thought with me. But I'm just thinking through this idea that like I'm going to step on the toes of the morality piece again. So that like the idea of having a consciousness in a sense, which I don't know that there's like any reasonable explanation for like what consciousness is. Maybe there is, but I just kind of think of it as holding like the framework for our morality in a sense. Like there's just things that are ingrained in our conscious tells us what's right, what's wrong, like the devil and the angel on our shoulder. And I kind of think of in that sense, the idea of being like showing gratitude towards things as a way of like hedging against the devilish side of our consciousness in a weird way. I don't know. Like, am I making any sense to anybody else here? Like if we were to betray our consciousness and go with the devilish side, we would also in a sense be betraying the people and therefore not showing gratitude towards the other people in our life, which would in turn again like be very negative towards our long-term existence and outlook on the planet, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to take if you were to perceive things to be ending in the short term and you decided I'm going to take on an exploitative strategy and I'm just going to screw everyone. And there are people who, are one shot, zero sum type of dealers who really kind of think it's me or you every time, each interaction. And so I think that, that's what I think you're saying is basically I'm just going to, try and get the most I can right now because maybe my horizon is just much shorter. It's just doesn't seem as if things are going to be, persist as long into the future. And especially because people can be so transient these days, right? So it's like I can come into a social network and I don't have to really, I might just be manipulative and exploitative and I can move on. And so there are plenty of people like that. But, but in general, the devilish kinds of things, depending on what you're talking about.
I guess.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, I guess just that feeling of like you've betrayed your better judgment. Like you knew something was right or wrong. Like I'll use a petty example of like you stole something from the local store and you've let yourself down because you knew you shouldn't have done that. I would say the more and like that's a very simple example, but like can start to put yourself in like a darker place with like really harshly judging yourself and thinking that you should have been better. So I guess on the alternate side of that, I would say that showing gratitude or, in that situation, it's not the same type of, but I guess like with the store clerk, like there's a mutual respect and relationship there. And when you violate that relationship and you go against your conscience and you do the thing that's wrong, it's like I'm seeing it as two steps backwards to do the thing that goes against your consciousness. That's the non-gratitude expressing thing, which would just, in my perspective, reinforce why it's so important to like follow your better judgment, be grateful. I think it's just, I'm again, not knowing what the base framework for this is, but it just seems like the logic test, it would completely pass because it's beneficial for your relationship and it's also beneficial for your psychology to just do the thing that expresses gratitude in the moment. And so I want to live the life that is going to return to me the most fruitful version of whatever life can return to me, that would be the best way of achieving that.
Mm-hmm.
I have many things to say in response to that, but I will just lead with, you're a good guy. But the thing is that, the idea of the feelings that you feel when you steal from a store, the idea that there might be some guilt and shame because especially if you were watched doing this, that people can start devaluing you and your community can start very quickly, decreasing its value of you and perhaps excluding you socially. Ancestrally, this would have been really bad. And so the idea that identifying those missteps and engaging that piece of machinery that says you just, imposed a cost or you took a benefit without paying a cost. And now you've run up against a group norm that everyone shares. And if it's found out, you could be in a whole, tub of hot water. And so I think that all of that comes from, listen, if we were in a world, let me change the world for a second. Put yourself in a world where that's totally legit. Like walking in and just taking stuff. That's what people do. Like, welcome to my world. You walk into a store, there's stuff there. You just take it. And if you don't, people look at you weird. Like, what are you doing hesitating? Just take it. And so if everyone had that same kind of viewpoint that was okay, you never would have had that feeling. It's just a matter of the fact that you grew up in a world where such things were punished and targeted, and people who did that, ran the risk of being, locked up and excluded socially, removed from the mating pool. And so I think that, we're very sensitive to those things, and that would motivate you to say, hey, look, those are bad things to do, and we shouldn't be doing them. And so that's why I said, you're a good guy. Like you are a good human. And I think someone that other people are going to want to cooperate with. If you had said what I'm saying, on the other hand, it'd be like, I don't know about this chick. So I think that we are so sensitive to the social norms and the staying on the right side of social approval, staying on the higher leverage side. I don't like the word right. Staying on the higher leverage side of social approval to stay out of hot water is really important. It helps explain why, people in Germany, did the things that they did, out of fear. It's like, they're good people in Germany, it's like, people are like, there's something wrong with those people. There's nothing wrong with those people. They're just like us. They have the same systems. They were working in a context that basically put leverage in the hands of some people who wanted to do really bad things. And it was a scary situation. And it's not unlike what's happening in academia right now, with people trying to scare and cancel people for saying things. So in any case, I think gratitude is, so in terms of put evolution aside for a moment, I think that now that we kind of know the systems we have, we can play with them and tinker with them and try to activate them in ways that we know might increase our happiness. Evolution didn't necessarily select us to be happy. It selected us to reproduce. And so the things that make us happy are very different. And so I think that if you can push on the gas of gratitude and stay away from things that make you angry or are going to put you in the hot seat of shame or guilt, then I think that you will enjoy greater happiness than if you're walking around like as a man, like having a chip on your shoulder, angry, or, it ends up that big, formidable men and, extremely gorgeous women are far more likely to anger. And this is a known thing in the clinical world. And it ends up that individuals who perceive themselves to have all this leverage. I mean, when was the last time you heard Donald Trump say thank you? like share with me a recording of Donald Trump saying thank you, right? So it's just a very different kind of perspective that he has. And brain, but, perspective for sure. And he has definitely far greater leverage. Certainly, he did. And it just makes different things more obvious and real, and it just brings to the forefront certain preferences and ways to treat people. So it's just it's all part of the game. But I agree with you. I think gratitude is one of the most what do I want to say, underappreciated emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been trying to think a little bit more about Brendan's scenario of like stealing a food item or something.
Hey, I was thinking out loud here. Y'all were just y'all were just passengers on my word vomit when I went on there.
No, and Dr. Lieberman, as you're talking about like reciprocity, like I feel like you have a better chance of building a relationship with the clerk, expressing your gratitude, and then maybe going in at one point and saying, "Hey, I don't have any money. Like, would it be okay if I have this item?"
And the cooperation piece too.
And they'd be like, "Yeah, like
my goodness,
you've been a trusted friend. I appreciate you. Here you go."
Right? It's a repetitive interaction, and so it is something that you can build absolutely. No, I think that's where some of the specialness of human relationships really comes in. The idea that you can cultivate that value, in people in your daily lives. And so it does make things nicer, I think.
Yeah. And just the practicality of showing gratitude. Like there's literally there's a value in it that will come back to you through the guy trusting you the next time you go into the market and you forgot your wallet or whatever. Like there's a value to putting that positive gratitude mindset out into the world first, because it'll come back.
Yeah.
It's interesting as a parent, you try and get your child to say thank you all the time, right? And it's like, oh my God, like why won't this child like upload this one like very simple thing to say, like just upload this information. It's not hard. You say so much, say this. And so, but it's very interesting how it's really hard to get kids talk about socialization. If socialization were real, like my kid would be, a thank you, please, robot. And so, but he's very much not. It's very resistant until you gotta, pulling the muscle in order to get this to start happening, which I lack. And so there you go. But in any case, I think that the very fact that young children are so forgetful about that, and how parents it's so important to parents that children say these niceties to other people. I mean, that's something I've been thinking about just in terms of, so what's going on there? Parents are, what is it instructive in order to try and get their kid to see, hey, look, this is how you do things. This is going to benefit you in the future. Or is it say thank you to this person because I want them to identify you as someone who they value, so that they are no longer going, that they might value, so it actually cultivates and kind of improves, your welfare all around in this environment kind of thing. And it might even be strategic like that, right? So it's like, say thank you. He thanks you so much.
And it's funny, there's even like degrees of thank you, right? Like there's the obligatory thank you, and then there's the real thank you that you give somebody. So even as adults, we're kind of in this like back and forth of wanting to show it because it's the polite thing to do, and really expressing true gratitude for something through a thank you. I think maybe adults have just been betrayed too many times that we really know when we're appreciative, and maybe kids just don't know. They're like, yeah, this is the way things go. Like we just get things and that's the way it happens. But then you get betrayed enough, and as an adult, you're like, wow, that really is something worth being thankful for.
Yeah. Oh my God, you didn't just try and run me off the road. Thank you.
Yeah. I know. I feel like there's like a fine line between like grateful and then manipulative to a certain extent as well.
Well, there's just a fine line between tacit versus explicit manipulation. That's all. I mean, listen, saying gratitude is, when you say manipulative, it is manipulating you, and you are evolved to say these things and respond in such ways because it had effects on other people's brains. You are manipulating the variables and the representations in other people's brains. It's no less manipulative. It's just whether or not you mean to do it in the conscious. I know how to get what I want.
Yeah.
And it involves, I might be like a stone cold, bee, and then yet I might be able to, hi, how are you? and so, yeah, after this podcast, you should see what, I'm just kidding. And so I think that there are people who, the art, these are charlatans and they're artists about how to get what they want. And some people are really good like this. I think that the more you know about human nature, the more you understand what these emotions are, the more you identify words like, that's good, that's disgusting, I'm so grateful, right? These things, they mean, so the question is, what are people, it just allows you an extra sense of awareness as to what people might be up to and what their motives might be. Just as, when you don't hear a thank you, when you don't hear that's disgusting, or you don't hear that's wrong, it tells you very similar, can also be quite instructive as well. And so, I love this field. We're beginning to know more, but we still know, I graduated college in 95. I took that class in 93 and we're, oh my God, that's what is that? 30 years?
Yeah.
And so, but the idea that, we're 30 years on and we're still identifying how much we don't know, how much we're blind to all of these instincts, that we really have, and the circuitry that I say control, but I don't want to say it that way, but the kind of circuitry that supports a lot of our abilities, and how it develops and how it calibrates and how you get all this variation that you see among humans. There's so much to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this has been awesome. I feel like I've learned a lot about a lot of different topics that I thought I might have been familiar with, but there are just so many underlying things that are coming out of it that are so helpful to understand. So thank you so much for taking this time.
Yeah, thank you for not only teaching us about the human software that we all have, because that's what you said at the beginning is kind of where your field of expertise, but you also got to deal with some of my personal software malfunctions. So thank you.
We all have malfunctions. No, it was really great. Thank you so much for having me on, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.